Baby found a German Shepherd, curled up inside a plastic bag. What Baby did next left everyone in tears. What happened next will shock you. This is the story that you are about to listen to, a story so unbelievable, so heartbreaking, that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the bond between humans and animals. But before we begin, make sure to like this story, share it with your friends, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The morning started like any other in the quiet village of Cedar Falls. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and a gentle spring breeze rustled through the oak trees that lined the small neighborhood. But what 5-year-old Tommy discovered that day would change everything, not just for him, but for his father, and for a creature that had been left to die in the most horrific way imaginable. Tommy lived with his father Jake in a modest house at the edge of town, where the concrete sidewalks gave way to dirt paths and the forest began its mysterious embrace. The boy had always been different from other children his age. While most kids his age chattered endlessly, Tommy spoke only in whispers, and sometimes not at all. His father worried constantly about this silence, but the doctors had no answers. "He'll speak when he's ready," they said, but Jake wondered if that day would ever come. The house felt too quiet most mornings. Jake would wake before dawn, make coffee in the small kitchen, and watch his son play with his collection of toy trucks in the living room. Tommy would move the trucks in careful patterns across the worn carpet, making soft humming sounds but never actual words. His amber eyes held a depth that seemed far beyond his years, as if he understood things that adults couldn't even grasp. That particular morning, Jake had stepped outside to check the mailbox when he noticed Tommy wasn't in his usual spot by the window. Panic shot through him like ice water. Tommy never wandered far. He was too cautious, too careful. But when Jake called his name, there was no response from inside the house. "Tommy!" Jake's voice cracked as he ran around to the backyard. The gate was open, something that never happened. Tommy knew the rules about staying close to home. Jake's heart hammered as he followed up the small footprints in the soft earth that led toward the woods. The trail led him past Mrs. Henderson's vegetable garden, past the old wooden fence that separated their neighborhood from the wildness beyond. Jake's breath came in short bursts as he pushed through the tall grass, calling his son's name again and again. The silence that came back felt like a punch to his chest. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it, a soft whimper, barely audible above the morning wind. Jake froze, straining his ears. There it was again, coming from somewhere near the old dumpster that the county had placed at the forest's edge for illegal dumping. People often left things there, broken furniture, old appliances, sometimes bags of garbage that should have gone to the proper disposal site. Jake pushed through a cluster of wild roses, thorns catching at his shirt, and stopped dead in his tracks. There was Tommy, kneeling beside something that made Jake's blood run cold. A large plastic bag, the kind used for lawn waste, was moving slightly, and from inside came the sounds of labored breathing. But it wasn't the bag that made Jake's heart nearly stop. It was what his son was doing. Tommy had his small hand pressed against the plastic, and his lips were moving. For the first time in months, Jake could see his son's mouth forming words, though he couldn't hear what they were from this distance. Jake approached slowly, afraid to break whatever spell had captured his son's attention. As he got closer, he could see tears streaming down Tommy's face, but the boy wasn't crying in fear. There was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. "Tommy," Jake whispered, dropping to his knees beside his son, "what did you find?" Tommy looked up at his father with those wise amber eyes, and Jake saw something he hadn't seen there in a very long time: urgency. The boy pointed at the bag, and Jake could see now that it was torn in several places. Through one of the tears, a patch of golden fur was visible, matted with something dark that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Jake's first instinct was to pull Tommy away. Whatever was in that bag could be dangerous, could be diseased, could be dead. But as he reached for his son's arm, Tommy did something that stopped him cold. The boy placed both hands on the bag and spoke, actually spoke, in a voice so clear and strong that Jake wondered if he was dreaming. "Don't be scared," Tommy said to whatever was inside. "I'm here now." The movement inside the bag stopped, as if the creature had heard and understood. Jake felt the hair on his arms stand up. There was something happening here that defied explanation, something that made the logical part of his mind want to run while another part, the part that had watched his son retreat into silence for so long, wanted to stay and see what miracle might unfold. Jake carefully pulled back more of the plastic, and what he saw made him sick to his stomach. It was a German shepherd, but barely recognizable as the proud, strong breed he knew. This dog was emaciated, its ribs showing through matted fur. Its eyes were crusted shut with infection, and there were wounds along its back that looked deliberate, too precise to be accidental injuries. But the most disturbing thing was around the dog's neck. Beneath the matted fur, Jake could see the remnants of a collar, not a regular pet collar, but something that looked almost military. It had been cut away roughly, leaving raw marks on the animal's throat. "We have to help him," Tommy said, and Jake nearly fell backward in shock. Those were more words than his son had spoken in the last 6 months combined. The dog's breathing was shallow and labored. Jake could see that it was dying, probably had been dying for days, left in this bag like garbage. The thought made anger surge through him. What kind of monster would do this to an animal? But as he watched, something extraordinary happened. Tommy placed his small hand on the dog's snout, right between its closed eyes, and began to hum, a soft, melodic sound that Jake had never heard before. The dog's breathing seemed to slow, to steady, and then one eye opened, just a crack, but enough to reveal an intelligence that was startling in its intensity. The eye fixed on Tommy, and Jake swore he saw recognition pass between them. Not the recognition of previous acquaintance, but something deeper, something that made his skin prickle with goosebumps. "Dad," Tommy said, looking up at Jake with an expression that was far too mature for his 5 years. "We have to take him home. He's been waiting for me." Jake wanted to ask what his son meant by that, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he found himself nodding, found himself carefully lifting the broken animal while Tommy held the bag open. The dog was heavier than Jake expected, and he could feel the animal's heart beating weakly against his chest. As they walked back toward the house, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random discovery. There was something about the way Tommy had known exactly where to find the bag, something about the way the dog had responded to his son's touch. It felt like destiny, though Jake had never believed in such things before. The dog remained conscious during the short walk home, its head resting against Jake's shoulder. Occasionally, Jake would feel the animal's eyes on him, studying him with an intelligence that was almost human. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. When they reached the house, Jake laid the dog carefully on the old blanket that Tommy had dragged from his bedroom. The animal was in worse shape than Jake had initially thought. Besides the obvious wounds and malnutrition, there were other signs of trauma, scars that looked surgical, patches where fur had been shaved and never grown back properly. "What happened to you?" Jake whispered, but the dog just looked at him with those knowing eyes. Tommy sat beside the blanket, his small hand never leaving the dog's head. And for the first time since his mother had died 2 years ago, Jake heard his son laugh. A sound of pure joy that filled the quiet house with something that had been missing for far too long. But even as Jake felt hope blooming in his chest, he couldn't shake the feeling that finding this dog was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than he could imagine. The precision of those wounds, the military-style collar, the way the animal had been disposed of, it all pointed to something that made Jake's protective instincts scream warnings. He looked down at his son, who was now singing softly to the injured animal, and made a decision that would change all their lives. Whatever had happened to this dog, whoever had hurt it, Jake would make sure they never got the chance to hurt it again, or his son. Because watching Tommy come alive again, hearing his voice after so many months of silence, Jake realized that this dog wasn't just a rescue, it was a miracle, and miracles, Jake knew, were worth fighting for. The next few hours would test everything Jake thought he knew about his son, about animals, and about the world itself. Jake had no idea that the moment Tommy touched that dog's snout, something had awakened inside both of them, something that would either save them all or destroy everything they held dear. Tommy refused to leave the dog's side, even when Jake tried to coax him away for lunch. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, his small fingers gently stroking the animal's matted fur, whispering words that Jake couldn't quite make out. There was something almost ritualistic about it, something that made Jake's skin crawl with unease, even as his heart swelled with joy at hearing his son's voice again. The dog's breathing had stabilized, but Jake could see that it was still in critical condition. He needed to get it to a veterinarian, but the nearest clinic was an hour away, and he wasn't sure the animal would survive the journey. More importantly, he wasn't sure he could separate Tommy from the dog long enough to make the trip. "Tommy," Jake said gently, kneeling beside his son, "we need to take him to the doctor. He's very sick." Tommy looked up at his father, with those amber eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond his years. "He doesn't want to go," the boy said simply. Jake blinked. "What do you mean he doesn't want to go?" "He's scared of doctors," Tommy replied, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. They hurt him before. A chill ran down Jake's spine. How could Tommy possibly know that? But as he looked at the dog's surgical scars, at the precise wounds that spoke of medical procedures rather than random violence, he found himself believing his son's impossible words. "How do you know that, buddy?" Jake asked carefully. Tommy's expression grew distant, almost dreamy. "He tells me things. In here." The boy touched his temple with one small finger. Jake felt the world tilt slightly. His son was 5 years old. 5-year-olds didn't communicate telepathically with injured animals. They didn't know things they couldn't possibly know. But watching Tommy's face, seeing the certainty there, Jake found his rational mind struggling to maintain its grip on reality. The dog's eyes opened fully for the first time, and Jake gasped. They were the most unusual color he'd ever seen. Not quite brown, not quite gold, but something in between that seemed to shift and change in the light. And they were looking directly at him with an intelligence that was definitely not normal for any animal he'd ever encountered. "See," Tommy said softly, "he knows you're good. That's why he's not scared of you." Jake reached out tentatively, and the dog allowed him to touch its head. The moment his fingers made contact with the animal's fur, Jake felt something like an electric shock run up his arm. Not painful, but startling, as if he had touched a live wire carrying something other than electricity. For just an instant, Jake could have sworn he saw flashes of images in his mind. A sterile white room, men in lab coats, needles and machines, and the sound of terrified whimpering. The images were gone so quickly, he almost convinced himself he'd imagined them, but the sick feeling in his stomach remained. "What did they do to you?" Jake whispered to the dog. The animal's eyes seemed to cloud with something that looked remarkably like sorrow, and then, impossibly, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. It wasn't audible, it came from inside his head, like a voice speaking directly to his thoughts. "They tried to make me into something I wasn't supposed to be." Jake jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. The voice disappeared immediately, leaving him wondering if he was losing his mind. But Tommy was nodding, as if he'd heard it too. "That's why we have to keep him safe," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "They'll come looking for him." "Who will come looking?" Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Tommy's face grew serious in a way that was heartbreaking to see on someone so young. The bad men who made him different. As if summoned by those words, Jake's phone rang. He glanced at the display and frowned. It was a number he didn't recognize, with an area code that wasn't local. He almost didn't answer, but something compelled him to pick up. "Hello? Mr. Henderson?" The voice was crisp, professional, with an authority that immediately put Jake on edge. "No, this is Jake Morrison. You have the wrong number." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Morrison. This is Agent Collins with the Department of Agricultural Security. We're investigating reports of a potentially dangerous animal in your area." Jake's mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, what?" "We have reason to believe that a specially trained canine may have been abandoned in the Cedar Falls area. This animal could pose a significant threat to public safety if not properly contained. Have you seen anything unusual in your neighborhood recently?" Jake looked down at the dog lying on his living room floor, at his son who was now humming softly while stroking the animal's ears. Everything about this situation was unusual, but something about the agent's tone made Jake's protective instincts flare. "No," Jake lied smoothly, "nothing unusual at all." Another pause. "I see. Well, if you do encounter anything out of the ordinary, any injured or stray animals, particularly large dogs, please contact us immediately. Do not attempt to approach or assist the animal. It could be extremely dangerous." The agent rattled off a phone number, which Jake pretended to write down. After hanging up, he stared at his phone with growing unease. How had they gotten his number? How did they know to call him specifically? Tommy was watching him with those two knowing eyes. "They found us already," the boy said quietly. "Who found us?" "The bad men. They're looking for Storm." Jake blinked. "Storm?" "That's his name," Tommy said, gesturing to the dog. "He told me." Jake ran his hands through his hair, trying to process everything that was happening. His son was claiming to communicate telepathically with a dog that apparently had a name and a history with some kind of government agency. It was insane. It was impossible. But it was also the first time in 2 years that Tommy had shown any real engagement with the world around him. "Tommy," Jake said carefully, "how long have you been able to talk to animals?" His son considered this question with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Since Mommy died," he said finally, "but Storm is the first one who talks back." Jake felt his heart break all over again. After his wife Sarah's death in the car accident, Tommy had retreated so far into himself that Jake had feared he might never come back. The doctors had called it selective mutism brought on by trauma, but they'd had no real solutions, no timeline for recovery. Now, looking at his son's animated face as he communed with this mysterious dog, Jake realized that maybe Tommy hadn't been broken at all. Maybe he'd just been waiting for the right connection. Storm, Jake found himself thinking of the dog by the name Tommy had given him, lifted his head slightly and looked directly at Jake. Those strange golden eyes held a depth of intelligence that was almost human, and Jake felt that same electric tingle he'd experienced earlier. "Your son is special," came that impossible voice in his head. "He can hear things others cannot. It's a gift." Jake shook his head, trying to clear it. "This isn't real," he muttered. But Tommy heard him and looked up with concern. "What's not real, Dad?" "I thought I heard—" "Never mind." Jake rubbed his temples. "I think I need some coffee." As he walked to the kitchen, Jake tried to make sense of what was happening. Government agents were looking for this dog. Tommy was claiming to communicate with it telepathically, and Jake himself was starting to hear voices in his head. Either they were all losing their minds, or something truly extraordinary was occurring in his quiet little house. While the coffee brewed, Jake found himself thinking about the phone call. Agent Collins had sounded professional, official, but there was something about the conversation that didn't sit right. Why would the Department of Agricultural Security be interested in a stray dog? And how had they gotten his phone number when he hadn't reported finding any animal? Jake pulled out his laptop and did a quick search for the Department of Agricultural Security. What he found made his blood run cold. The department existed, but it was a relatively small agency focused on livestock diseases and farm inspections. Nothing in their official mandate suggested they would be tracking down individual animals. So, who had really called him? Jake returned to the living room to find Tommy asleep beside Storm, his small hand resting on the dog's neck. The animal was awake, though, watching Jake with those unsettling eyes that seemed to see too much. As Jake approached, Storm's lips moved slightly, and Jake heard that voice in his head again, clearer this time, more distinct. "They will come tonight. We must be ready." "Ready for what?" Jake whispered aloud. "To run, to fight, to protect what matters most." Jake looked down at his sleeping son, at this boy who had been silent for so long and was now claiming to communicate with a dog that government agents were hunting. Everything logical in Jake's mind screamed that this was impossible, but everything paternal in his heart told him to listen. "What did they do to you?" Jake asked quietly. The images that flooded his mind were clearer this time, more detailed. Jake saw sterile laboratories, scientists in white coats, needles filled with strange substances. He saw other dogs, dozens of them, in cages, some normal-looking, others changed in ways that defied nature. He knew Storm as a puppy, scared and alone, subjected to procedure after procedure designed to enhance his intelligence, his strength, his ability to communicate. "They wanted to create the perfect soldier," Storm's voice explained. "But they created something else instead. Something that could think, something that could feel, something that could choose. And you chose to escape. I chose to find him." Storm's eyes shifted to Tommy. "Your son calls to us, to all of us who were changed. He is our hope." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do you mean, all of us? There are others?" But before Storm could answer, Jake heard the sound of cars pulling into his driveway. Multiple vehicles, their engines running quietly, as if trying not to announce their arrival. Jake moved to the window and peered through the curtains, his heart sinking at what he saw. 3 black SUVs were parked outside his house. Men in dark suits were getting out, moving with the practiced efficiency of a military unit. They wore earpieces and had bulges under their jackets that clearly indicated concealed weapons. "Tommy!" Jake whispered urgently, shaking his son awake. "Tommy, we need to go, now!" The boy opened his eyes immediately, as if he'd been expecting this. "They're here," he said simply. Storm was already on his feet, despite his injuries. The dog moved with surprising grace for an animal that had been near death just hours earlier, and Jake realized that whatever had been done to him had enhanced more than just his intelligence. "Is there another way out?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Their small house had only two exits, the front door and the back sliding door that led to the yard. Tommy pointed toward the basement. "The old coal chute. Mommy showed me once." Jake had forgotten about the coal chute, a relic from when the house had been heated by coal decades earlier. It led from the basement to a small opening on the side of the house, hidden by overgrown bushes. It would be a tight fit for an adult, but it might be their only chance. The sound of footsteps on the front porch spurred Jake into action. He scooped Tommy into his arms while Storm limped beside them toward the basement stairs. Behind them, Jake heard the front door being tested, still locked, but probably not for long. The basement was dark and musty, filled with boxes and old furniture that Jake had been meaning to sort through since they'd moved in. The coal chute was in the far corner, a small metal door set into the foundation wall. Jake prayed it wasn't rusted shut. Above them, Jake heard the front door open. They were inside the house now, moving with purpose. Jake heard muffled voices, official-sounding commands being given. The coal chute opened with a screech that sounded deafeningly loud in the quiet basement. Jake boosted Tommy through first, then coaxed Storm to follow. The dog hesitated for a moment, looking back at Jake with those golden eyes. "Come with us," the voice in Jake's head urged. "If you stay, they will use you to find us." Jake squeezed through the narrow opening just as he heard footsteps on the basement stairs. They emerged into the overgrown bushes on the side of the house, scratched and dirty, but free, for the moment. "Where do we go?" Jake whispered to Tommy, who seemed remarkably calm for a 5-year-old who had just escaped from government agents. Tommy looked at Storm as if consulting with him. "The old Miller farm," he said after a moment. "Storm says it's safe there." Jake knew the place. An abandoned farm about 10 miles outside of town, empty since old Mr. Miller had died 5 years earlier. It would provide temporary shelter, but Jake knew they couldn't hide there forever. As they made their way through the woods behind the house, staying low and moving as quietly as possible, Jake realized that his life had just changed forever. Whatever Storm was, whatever had been done to him, Jake and Tommy were now part of it. They were fugitives, running from people who had the authority to take a sick animal away from a little boy who had just found his voice again. But as Jake watched Tommy and Storm moving together through the shadows, he realized something else. Whatever bond existed between his son and this remarkable dog, it was worth protecting, even if it meant giving up everything they'd known, even if it meant running for the rest of their lives. Behind them, Jake could see flashlights sweeping through their house, searching for something they would never find. Because what they were really looking for wasn't just a genetically modified dog. It was the connection between a lonely boy and a creature that had been given the ability to understand what loneliness meant. What do you think the agents will do when they realize Jake, Tommy, and Storm have escaped? And what other secrets is Storm hiding about the experiments that created him? The journey to the Miller farm took them through dense woods and across 2 creeks, with Storm somehow knowing exactly which path to take despite his injuries. Tommy rode on Jake's shoulders for most of the way, whispering directions that he claimed Storm was giving him. Jake had stopped questioning the impossibility of it all. His son was speaking, they were alive, and that was enough for now. When they finally reached the abandoned farmhouse, Jake was exhausted, and Tommy was fast asleep in his arms. Storm, despite everything he had been through, seemed surprisingly alert as he led them to a barn behind the main house. The structure was old but solid, with hay bales stacked high enough to provide both shelter and concealment. Jake settled Tommy on a pile of old blankets he found in a corner, then turned his attention to Storm. In the dim light filtering through the barn's broken windows, the dog's injuries looked even worse than before. The surgical scars were infected, and Jake could see that Storm was fighting just to stay conscious. "You need medical attention," Jake whispered. Storm's golden eyes met his, and once again Jake heard that impossible voice in his head. "Not from their doctors. There is someone else. Someone who helped others like me." "Others like you?" Jake asked aloud, then caught himself and tried to think the question instead. "The experiments created 12 of us. I am the only one who escaped intact." The mental voice carried a weight of sadness that made Jake's chest tighten. The others. They either didn't survive the procedures, or they survived but lost themselves in the process. Jake closed his eyes, trying to process this information. 12 genetically modified dogs, created by some shadow government program. It sounded like science fiction, but the evidence was lying right in front of him, breathing with difficulty and communicating telepathically. Who is this person who can help? Jake thought. Dr. Elena Vasquez. She worked on the project before her conscience forced her to leave. She has been helping us ever since. Where is she? Storm's response came not in words but in images. A small veterinary clinic about 50 miles north, hidden in a town so small it barely appeared on maps. Jake saw a woman with graying hair and kind eyes, working late into the night to heal animals that no one else would understand. Can you make it that far? Jake asked. With your son's help, yes, but there is something you must understand first. Storm struggled to lift his head higher. The connection between Tommy and me, it is not accidental. Your son has a gift that we were programmed to recognize and respond to. He is what they call a natural communicator. Jake felt his blood chill. What does that mean? It means that when they realize what he can do, they will never stop hunting him. Not just to get me back, but to get him. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. It wasn't enough that they were running from people who wanted their dog back. Tommy himself was now a target. A 5-year-old boy who had just found his voice again was being hunted by people who wanted to use his gift for their own purposes. Jake looked over at his sleeping son, at the peaceful expression on Tommy's face as he dreamed. 2 days ago, their biggest worry had been getting Tommy to speak at all. Now Jake was facing the possibility that they might never have a normal life again. There is more, Storm's voice continued, gentler now, as if he sensed Jake's distress. The gift your son has, it is not just with animals like me. He can sense things, understand things that others cannot. It is why he went silent after his mother died. He felt her leaving in a way that was too much for a child to bear. Jake's eyes filled with tears. Sarah's death had been sudden. A drunk driver had hit her car on her way home from work. Tommy had been with Jake when they got the news, but Jake had always wondered if somehow his son had known before they told him. Tommy's immediate retreat into silence had been so complete, so profound, that it had seemed like more than just a reaction to grief. He knew she was gone before we told him, Jake whispered. He felt her spirit departing. It nearly broke his mind. That is why he stopped speaking. He was afraid of feeling too much, of knowing things he was not ready to know. But he's speaking now. Because I need him to, and because he senses that I will not leave him the way his mother did. Jake wiped his eyes, trying to focus on practical matters. They needed food, they needed medical care for Storm, and they needed a plan that went beyond hiding in an abandoned barn. As if reading his thoughts, Storm spoke again. Dr. Vasquez will help us, but first we must contact her. There is a phone in the farmhouse. I can sense it still has power. Jake frowned. How can you sense that? Another enhancement. I can detect electromagnetic fields, among other things. Jake was beginning to realize that Storm's modifications went far beyond simple intelligence enhancement. Whatever they had done to him had created something truly extraordinary and truly dangerous to those who had created him. Jake made his way to the farmhouse, leaving Tommy sleeping in the barn, with Storm standing guard despite his injuries. The house was in better condition than Jake had expected. Apparently someone had been maintaining it, even after the owner's death. The phone Storm had sensed was an old rotary model in the kitchen, and to Jake's amazement, it did indeed have a dial tone. Dr. Vasquez answered on the third ring, her voice cautious and professional. Crossroads Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Vasquez, my name is Jake Morrison. I have a friend who told me you might be able to help with a special case. There was a long pause. What kind of special case? Jake wasn't sure how to explain without sounding insane. I found an injured German shepherd. He has some unusual characteristics, and there are people looking for him, government people. Another pause, longer this time. When Dr. Vasquez spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. What does he look like? Jake described Storm's appearance, including the surgical scars and the strange golden eyes. He heard Dr. Vasquez's sharp intake of breath. Is he with you now? She asked. Yes, along with my 5-year-old son, who seems to have formed an unusual bond with him. Mr. Morrison, you and your son are in great danger. Those people you mentioned, they will not stop looking. And if they find you, what will they do? They will take the dog back to the facility, and they will take your son too, if they realize what he can do. Jake's worst fears were confirmed. Dr. Vasquez, can you help us? I can try, but you need to understand. Helping you means I become a fugitive too. Are you prepared for that? Jake thought about Tommy's first words in months, about the joy on his son's face when he realized he could communicate with Storm. Yes, we're prepared. Then bring him to me, but be careful. They have resources you can't imagine. And Mr. Morrison, whatever you do, don't let them separate your son from the dog. The bond they've formed may be the only thing keeping both of them sane. After getting directions to Dr. Vasquez's clinic, Jake hung up and returned to the barn. Tommy was awake now, sitting beside Storm with his hand resting on the dog's head. Both of them looked up when Jake approached, and he had the unsettling feeling that they had been discussing him. Dr. Vasquez will help us, Jake said, but we need to leave soon. Tommy nodded solemnly. Storm says the bad men are getting closer. They have machines that can track him. Jake's heart sank. What kind of machines? Something they put inside him, Tommy said, touching a spot behind Storm's left ear. It hurts him. Jake looked more closely and saw what he had missed before. A small raised area beneath the skin that could only be some kind of implant. Can it be removed? Tommy looked at Storm, as if consulting him. Dr. Vasquez can do it, but Storm says it will be very dangerous. If they remove it wrong, it could kill him. Jake weighed their options. If they kept the implant, they would be tracked wherever they went. If they removed it and something went wrong, they would lose Storm, and possibly Tommy's newfound ability to communicate. What do you want to do? Jake asked his son. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious with the weight of the decision. Finally, he looked up at Jake with those amber eyes that held far too much wisdom for a 5-year-old. Storm says we have to try. He says freedom is worth the risk. Jake nodded, making his decision. Then we go to Dr. Vasquez. They gathered what few supplies they could find in the barn, some old rope, a tarp, and a rusty toolbox that might prove useful. Storm insisted on walking, though Jake could see the effort it cost him. Tommy stayed close to the dog's side, one small hand resting on Storm's back as if lending him strength. The journey to Dr. Vasquez's clinic would take them through the night, across terrain that offered little cover from the helicopter Jake could now hear in the distance. The sound grew closer with each passing minute, and Jake realized that their pursuers had found the Miller farm. They're tracking the implant, Jake said, more to himself than anyone else. Tommy looked up at him with frightened eyes. What if they catch us? Jake knelt down and put his hands on his son's shoulders. They won't catch us, I promise. But even as he said the words, Jake could see the searchlights beginning to sweep the woods around them. The helicopter was close enough now that he could feel the downdraft from its rotors, and he knew they had minutes at most before they were discovered. Storm stumbled, finally succumbing to his injuries and exhaustion. Jake didn't hesitate. He lifted the large dog in his arms, ignoring the pain in his back and the burning in his lungs. Tommy ran beside them, tears streaming down his face but not making a sound. Behind them, Jake could hear vehicles approaching the farm. Doors slamming, orders being shouted, dogs barking as they picked up their scent. The hunt had begun in earnest. They reached Dr. Vasquez's clinic just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. Jake was carrying both Tommy and Storm now, his son exhausted from the night-long journey and the dog barely conscious. The clinic was exactly as Storm had shown him, a small, humble building that looked more like a house than a medical facility. Dr. Vasquez met them at the door, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. She took one look at Storm and immediately ushered them inside. How long has he been unconscious? She asked, directing Jake to place Storm on an examination table. About an hour, Jake gasped, finally able to set down his burdens. Dr. Vasquez worked quickly, checking Storm's vital signs and examining his wounds. The implant is causing a systemic infection, she said grimly. We need to remove it immediately, or he'll die within hours. And if the removal goes wrong, Jake asked, he'll die immediately instead of slowly. Tommy stepped forward, placing his small hand on Storm's head. He says to do it. He says he's not afraid. Dr. Vasquez looked at Tommy with surprise, then understanding. You can hear him. Tommy nodded. He says to tell you thank you for helping the others. Tears filled Dr. Vasquez's eyes. I couldn't save them all, she whispered. But you tried, Tommy said, and Jake realized his son was no longer speaking for Storm. These were his own words, his own wisdom. That's what matters. Dr. Vasquez prepared for the surgery, while Jake held Tommy close, both of them watching the woman who might be their only hope. Outside, Jake could hear the distant sound of helicopters, getting closer with each passing minute. "Will he be okay?" Tommy whispered. Jake looked down at his son, at this remarkable boy who had found his voice through his connection with an equally remarkable dog. "I don't know, buddy, but whatever happens, we're in this together." As Dr. Vasquez made the first incision behind Storm's ear, Jake realized that their old life was truly over. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they would face, they were now part of something much larger than themselves. They were part of Storm's story, and he was part of theirs. The question was whether any of them would survive long enough to see how that story ended. Do you think Storm will survive the dangerous surgery, and what will happen when the agents finally track them down at the clinic? The surgery took 3 hours, during which Jake and Tommy sat in Dr. Vasquez's small waiting room, listening to the sound of helicopters circling overhead and the distant barking of tracking dogs. Tommy hadn't spoken since Storm had gone under anesthesia, and Jake wondered if the connection between them had been severed by the dog's unconscious state. Dr. Vasquez emerged from the operating room, looking exhausted but relieved. In her hand was a small metallic device about the size of a pill, covered in Storm's blood. "I got it out," she said, holding up the tracking implant. "But it was more complex than I expected. This isn't just a GPS tracker, it's some kind of neural interface." Jake stared at the device, feeling sick. What does that mean? It means they weren't just tracking him. They were monitoring his thoughts, his emotions, possibly even controlling certain behaviors. Dr. Vasquez placed the implant in a lead-lined container. "This will block any remaining signal, but we need to destroy it completely." Tommy suddenly looked up, his eyes bright with hope. "Storm's waking up. He says the voices in his head are gone." Dr. Vasquez led them back to Storm, who was indeed conscious and looking more alert than Jake had seen him since they had found him in that plastic bag. The dog's golden eyes met Jake's, and for the first time, the telepathic voice that came through was completely clear, no longer distorted by pain or interference. "I am free." Storm's voice resonated in Jake's mind with a clarity that was breathtaking. "For the first time since I was a puppy, I am truly free." Tommy threw his arms around Storm's neck, tears of joy streaming down his face. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "Never," Storm replied, and Jake could hear the warmth in that mental voice. "We are connected now, Tommy. Nothing they did to me can break that bond." Dr. Vasquez watched this interaction with wonder. In all my years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything like this. The connection between your son and Storm, it's unlike anything the experiments were designed to create. "What were they designed to create?" Jake asked. Dr. Vasquez's expression darkened. "Super soldiers, dogs with enhanced intelligence, strength, and obedience. The telepathic abilities were supposed to be limited to basic commands from their handlers, but Storm and the others, they developed beyond what anyone anticipated." "What happened to the other dogs?" "Some died during the procedures. Others survived but were changed in ways that made them unsuitable for military use. The project was shut down 6 months ago, and all remaining subjects were ordered to be terminated." Jake felt his blood run cold. "Terminated?" "Storm escaped the night before his scheduled execution. I helped him get out, but I didn't know if he'd survived until your phone call." Tommy looked up at Dr. Vasquez with his 2 wise eyes. "Storm says you saved 3 others too, before him." Dr. Vasquez nodded, tears in her eyes. "Luna, a golden retriever with enhanced empathic abilities. Atlas, a Rottweiler who could detect explosives from miles away. And Sage, a border collie whose intelligence tested higher than most humans. They're all living new lives now, with families who understand what they are." "Are they safe?" Jake asked. "As safe as any of us can be. The program may have been officially shut down, but the people who ran it, they don't give up easily, especially not when they realize what they lost." As if summoned by her words, the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed reached them. Jake looked out the window and saw black SUVs surrounding the clinic, men in tactical gear taking positions around the building. "Back exit?" Jake asked tersely. "Blocked," Dr. Vasquez replied, checking another window. "They've surrounded us." Storm struggled to his feet, still weak from surgery, but determined. "There is another way," his voice came to both Jake and Tommy simultaneously, "but you must trust me completely." "What do you mean?" Jake asked aloud. "The modifications they made to me, they were not just physical. I can do things they never intended, but I will need Tommy's help." Tommy placed his hand on Storm's head without hesitation. What do you need me to do? Think with me. Feel with me. Let our minds connect completely. Jake watched in amazement as his son closed his eyes and seemed to sink into some kind of trance. Storm's eyes began to glow with an inner light that Jake had never seen before, and the air around them began to hum with an energy that made Jake's skin tingle. Dr. Vasquez backed away, her eyes wide. What's happening? We are becoming what we were always meant to be. Storm's voice echoed in all their minds now, no longer limited to just Jake and Tommy. Not weapons, not experiments, but something new. The front door of the clinic burst open, and Agent Collins entered with 4 other men, all armed and wearing body armor. Collins looked exactly as Jake had imagined from his voice, cold, professional, and utterly without mercy. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Collins said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. You are under arrest for theft of government property and treason. That property is a living being with thoughts and feelings, Dr. Vasquez replied defiantly. Collins's eyes found Jake and Tommy. Mr. Morrison, you've caused us quite a lot of trouble, but we're prepared to overlook your interference if you hand over the subject and cooperate with our testing of your son. Testing? Jake stepped protectively in front of Tommy. Your son's abilities are of great interest to national security. We need to understand how he communicates with our enhanced subjects. My son is not a subject, Jake said through gritted teeth. He's a 5-year-old boy. He's an asset, Collins replied coldly, and assets belong to the people who can best utilize them. That was when Storm acted. The dog moved faster than Jake would have thought possible, placing himself between the agents and Tommy. But instead of growling or showing aggression, Storm did something that made everyone in the room freeze. He spoke, not telepathically, but with an actual voice, deep, resonant, and unmistakably intelligent. You will not touch the boy. The agents raised their weapons, but Collins held up a hand to stop them. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Impossible. The vocal modifications were never successfully implemented. You underestimated what you created, Storm said, his golden eyes fixed on Collins. We are not your weapons. We are not your property. We are free beings with the right to choose our own path. Tommy stepped out from behind Jake, no longer afraid. His connection with Storm had given him a courage that amazed his father. Storm is my friend. You can't have him. Collins looked at Tommy with calculating eyes. The boy has formed a symbiotic bond with the subject. This is even better than we hoped. We can study them together. No, Dr. Vasquez said firmly. I won't let you take them. You don't have a choice, Collins replied. Gentlemen, secure the subjects. But as the agents moved forward, something extraordinary happened. The lights in the clinic began to flicker, and every electronic device in the building started malfunctioning. The agents' radios crackled with static, their weapons' electronic sights went dark, and even their vehicles outside began honking their horns erratically. Tommy and Storm stood together at the center of it all, their eyes glowing with the same inner light. Jake realized that their connection had evolved into something the scientists had never intended. They were sharing not just thoughts, but abilities. We are leaving now, Storm's voice echoed in everyone's mind, carrying a power that made the agents step back involuntarily. Anyone who tries to stop us will face the consequences. What consequences? Collins demanded, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Tommy answered, his child's voice carrying an authority that was both beautiful and terrifying. Storm isn't the only one they changed. There are others, and they're coming. As if summoned by Tommy's words, Jake heard new sounds outside, howling that was definitely not from normal dogs, and the sound of the agents' vehicles being systematically disabled. Through the window, Jake caught glimpses of shapes moving through the darkness, other dogs, but changed like Storm, each unique in their modifications. Collins spoke urgently into his radio, but got only static in response. How many are there? All of them, Tommy said simply. Everyone you tried to kill, everyone Dr. Vasquez saved, everyone who escaped. They heard Storm's call, and they came. Dr. Vasquez stared in amazement. Luna, Atlas, and Sage, they're here? We are Pack, Storm's voice confirmed. We protect our own. The clinic door opened again, but this time it wasn't agents entering. A beautiful golden retriever with eyes like sapphires walked in, followed by a massive Rottweiler whose presence seemed to fill the room with calm strength. Behind them came a border collie whose intelligence was visible in every careful, calculated movement. Collins and his men found themselves surrounded by creatures that had been designed to be the perfect soldiers, but who had chosen instead to be something far more dangerous, free beings who protected those they loved. "Luna," Dr. Vasquez whispered, kneeling as the golden retriever approached her. The dog nuzzled her hand gently, and Jake heard a new voice in his mind, softer than Storm's, but no less powerful. "Hello, Elena. We came as soon as we heard Storm's call." Atlas, the Rottweiler, positioned himself between the agents and the rest of the group. His mental voice was deep and reassuring. "The boy and Storm are under our protection now, as are you, Elena, as are all who helped us." Sage, the border collie, studied the situation with calculating eyes before speaking directly to Collins. "Your weapons are useless now. Your communications are blocked. Your vehicles are disabled. You have no choice but to let us leave." Collins looked around at the 4 enhanced dogs and the small group of humans they were protecting. For the first time since Jake had encountered him, the agent looked uncertain. "This isn't over," Collins said finally. "You can't run forever." Tommy stepped forward, still holding on to Storm's neck. "We're not running anymore. We're going home." "Home?" Collins laughed bitterly. "You don't have a home. You're fugitives now." Tommy smiled, and in that smile Jake saw a wisdom that his son had gained through his connection with Storm. Home isn't a place, it's being with the people you love who love you back. Luna moved to Tommy's side, her sapphire eyes gentle. "The boy speaks truth. We have found our homes with families who accept us as we are." Atlas nodded his massive head. "And now, Storm has found his home too." Sage looked directly at Jake. "If you are willing to accept the responsibility of caring for one of us, knowing that it will change your life forever." Jake looked at his son, who was surrounded by these remarkable creatures and glowing with happiness. Tommy had found his voice again, had found purpose and connection and joy. How could Jake even consider taking that away from him? "Yes," Jake said firmly, "we accept the responsibility. Storm is part of our family now." Collins made one last attempt at authority. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. These creatures are dangerous. They're weapons." Storm turned his golden eyes on Collins, and when he spoke aloud again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We were made to be weapons, but we chose to be guardians instead. We chose love over fear, protection over destruction, family over masters. That choice," Tommy added, his small hand resting on Storm's head, "is what makes us free." As the enhanced dogs led Jake, Tommy, and Dr. Vasquez out of the clinic, Jake realized that his son was right. They weren't running away from something. They were walking toward a new kind of life, one where extraordinary bonds were possible, and where love could triumph over those who sought to use and control. The agents watched them go, powerless to stop them, as long as the pack stood united, and Jake knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A man, his son, and a dog who had been designed to be the perfect soldier, but had chosen instead to be the perfect friend. What do you think will happen now that all the enhanced dogs have reunited, and can Jake's small family really stay safe from the government forces hunting them? 6 months later, Jake stood on the porch of their new home in the mountains of Colorado, watching Tommy play in the yard with Storm and the other enhanced dogs, who had become part of their extended family. The house was larger than their old one, built on land that Dr. Vasquez had inherited from her grandmother, isolated enough to provide safety, but close enough to a small town for Tommy to attend school when he was ready. The transformation in Tommy had been remarkable. The shy, silent boy who had discovered Storm in that plastic bag was now confident and articulate, his gift for communication with the enhanced dogs making him something of a bridge between two worlds. He still preferred the company of the dogs to most humans, but he was learning to trust again, to open his heart to new possibilities. Storm had healed completely from his surgery, his golden coat now gleaming with health. But more than that, he had found peace. The constant pain from the neural implant was gone, and for the first time since he was a puppy, his mind was truly his own. He spent his days playing with Tommy, exploring the mountain wilderness, and helping to train the newer rescues that Dr. Vasquez brought to their sanctuary. Because that's what their home had become, a sanctuary for enhanced animals who had escaped from various government programs, and for the humans who loved them enough to risk everything to keep them safe. Luna lived with a family in town, the Hendersons, whose daughter had been born deaf and who communicated with Luna through a combination of sign language and telepathy. The golden retriever's empathic abilities had helped the little girl overcome her fear of social situations, giving her confidence to interact with other children. Atlas had found his home with an elderly veteran named Frank, whose PTSD nightmares had disappeared completely once the Rottweiler came into his life. Atlas's ability to sense and neutralize explosive devices had been transformed into something more healing. He could sense emotional explosions before they happened and provide the calming presence Frank needed. Sage lived with a family of scientists who appreciated her incredible intelligence and treated her as an equal partner in their research. Together, they were working on communication technologies that could help other animals express their needs and feelings to humans. But it was Tommy and Storm's bond that remained the strongest, the most mysterious. They had grown together in ways that even Dr. Vasquez couldn't fully explain. Tommy's telepathic abilities had expanded beyond just communicating with the enhanced dogs. He could sense the emotions and needs of all animals, and sometimes even humans who were in distress. On this particular morning, Jake noticed that both Tommy and Storm seemed restless. They kept looking toward the mountain path that led to their property, as if expecting someone. "What is it, buddy?" Jake asked his son. Tommy looked up at him with those amber eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Someone's coming. Someone who needs help. Jake felt the familiar chill of concern. In the 6 months since they'd escaped from Collins and his agents, they'd had several close calls. The government had never stopped looking for them, though the official search had been scaled back after a series of leaked documents had exposed the illegal nature of the enhancement program. Storm padded over to Jake, his mental voice calm but alert. Not agents this time. Someone else. Someone different. Before Jake could ask what Storm meant, he heard the sound of footsteps on the mountain path. A figure emerged from the tree line, a woman in her 30s, carrying a backpack and looking exhausted. But what made Jake's breath catch was what was following her. It was a wolf, but not quite a wolf. There was something in its pale blue eyes, something in the way it moved, that reminded Jake immediately of Storm and the other enhanced animals. This creature had been changed too. Tommy ran toward the woman without hesitation, Storm at his side. Jake followed more cautiously, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept mounted by the door. "Please," the woman called out when she saw them. "I need Dr. Vasquez. They told me she might be here." "Who told you?" Jake asked, not lowering his guard. "The others, the ones like him." She gestured to the wolf beside her. "My name is Sarah Chen. I used to work for the program, before I realized what we were really doing." Tommy had stopped a few feet away from the woman and the wolf, his head tilted as if listening to something Jake couldn't hear. "The wolf's name is Ghost," Tommy said suddenly. "He's scared and hungry, and he's been running for a very long time." Sarah Chen stared at Tommy in amazement. "You can hear him?" "Tommy can hear all of them," Jake said, still cautious but beginning to lower his defenses. There was something about this woman's desperation, something about the wolf's obvious exhaustion, that rang true. Dr. Vasquez emerged from the house, drawn by the commotion. When she saw Sarah, her face went pale. "Sarah? My God, what are you doing here?" "Elena, I'm so sorry. I know I have no right to ask for your help after what I did, but Ghost, he's dying. The modifications they made to him are breaking down." Dr. Vasquez looked at the wolf, her professional instincts overriding her personal feelings. "How long has he been symptomatic?" 3 weeks. Started with seizures, then loss of motor control. The neural pathways they created are deteriorating. Jake watched this exchange with growing understanding. Sarah Chen had been part of the program that created Storm and the others, but, unlike Agent Collins, she seemed to have developed a conscience. Storm approached the wolf cautiously, his golden eyes meeting Ghost's pale blue ones. Jake heard Storm's mental voice, speaking not just to him, but to everyone present. He is one of the first. Before they learned to make the modifications stable, he was not supposed to survive this long. Ghost raised his head with obvious effort, and Jake was startled to hear a new voice in his mind, weaker than Storm's, more fragmented, but definitely present. Pack. Found Pack at last. Tommy knelt beside the wolf, placing his small hand on Ghost's head. "It's okay. Dr. Vasquez can help you. She helped Storm." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I designed the neural pathways that are killing him. I thought I was advancing science, helping to create something wonderful, but they were just making weapons. And when I tried to stop the program from the inside, they made you disappear, Dr. Vasquez finished. We heard you'd been transferred, but no one knew where. Transferred to a black site facility. They wanted me to create more unstable modifications, ones that would give the animals incredible abilities for short periods before burning out their nervous systems completely. Suicide soldiers. Jake felt sick. You refused. I tried to refuse, but they had leverage. Sarah's voice broke. My daughter. They said if I didn't cooperate, she would have an accident. Tommy looked up from where he was comforting Ghost. Where is your daughter now? Safe, hidden with friends who understand the situation. But I couldn't leave Ghost. He was my first success and my greatest failure. I had to try to save him. Dr. Vasquez was already examining the wolf, her hands gentle but professional. The neural degradation is extensive. I'm not sure there's anything I can do. There is one possibility, Storm's voice came to all of them, but it is dangerous, and it will require all of us working together. What do you mean? Dr. Vasquez asked. The connection Tommy and I share, it can be extended to others. If we link our neural patterns with Ghost's, we might be able to stabilize his degrading pathways. Sarah stared at Storm in amazement. That's impossible. The modifications weren't designed for that kind of networked connection. We are no longer limited by your designs, Storm replied gently but firmly. We have grown beyond what you created. Tommy stood up, his young face serious with determination. We have to try. Ghost came here because he knew we would help him. Jake looked at his son, at this remarkable boy who had found his voice through his connection with these extraordinary animals. Is it safe for Tommy to be part of this linking? Storm met Jake's eyes directly. I would never let harm come to Tommy, but this is his choice to make. Tommy walked over to Jake and took his father's hand. Dad, when I was quiet for so long after Mom died, I was lost. Storm found me and brought me back. Now Ghost is lost, and we have to help bring him back too. Jake knelt down to his son's level. Are you sure about this? Tommy nodded solemnly. Storm taught me that family isn't just the people you're related to. It's the people you choose to protect, even when it's hard. Dr. Vasquez looked around at the group. Jake and Tommy, Storm, the dying wolf, and Sarah Chen, who was seeking redemption for her past mistakes. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now. Ghost doesn't have much time left. They gathered in the living room, Ghost lying on a blanket in the center, while the others formed a circle around him. Tommy sat beside Storm, his hand resting on the dog's head, while Storm placed his paw gently on Ghost's side. What do I need to do? Sarah asked. Just be here, Dr. Vasquez replied. Your presence might help stabilize the connection, since you understand his neural patterns better than anyone. Jake watched nervously as Tommy closed his eyes and seemed to sink into the same trance-like state he'd experienced during their escape from the clinic. Storm's eyes began to glow with that inner light, and slowly, Ghost's pale blue eyes began to brighten as well. We are here, Jake heard Storm's voice, but it seemed different now, somehow multiplied. You are not alone anymore. Ghost's mental voice came through stronger than before, still fragmented but more coherent. Pack, real pack, never had pack before. Tommy's voice joined the mental conversation, and Jake was amazed to hear his son's thoughts directly for the first time. You have pack now. We're your family. The connection deepened, and Jake could see changes in Ghost's physical condition. The wolf's breathing became steadier, his eyes brighter, his movements more coordinated. Whatever Tommy and Storm were doing, it was working. But then something unexpected happened. Jake began to hear other voices in his mind, not just the three animals and his son, but distant echoes of other enhanced creatures. Luna's gentle presence, Atlas's steady strength, Sage's brilliant intelligence. They were all somehow connected to this moment, lending their energy to help save Ghost. The network grows, Jake heard a new voice say. One he didn't recognize, but that felt familiar somehow. We are becoming what they never intended us to be. Not weapons, but healers. Not soldiers, but guardians. Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face. It's working. His neural pathways are stabilizing, but how is this possible? Dr. Vasquez was monitoring Ghost's vital signs, her expression one of wonder. The connections they're forming, they're actually repairing the damaged neural tissue. It's like they're sharing their strength with him. The process continued for nearly an hour, with Tommy never wavering in his concentration, despite the obvious strain. When it was finally over, Ghost raised his head and looked around the room with eyes that were clear and bright. "Thank you." The wolf's mental voice was strong now, no longer fragmented. "I have never felt whole before, not since the modifications began." Tommy opened his eyes and smiled, though Jake could see the exhaustion in his son's face. "Welcome to the family, Ghost." Ghost patted over to Tommy and gently licked the boy's hand. "I pledge my protection to this pack for as long as I live." Sarah was openly crying now. "I don't understand what just happened, but thank you. All of you. You've given him a second chance at life." "We've all been given second chances," Jake said, looking around at the remarkable group assembled in his living room. "The question is, what we do with them." Storm looked up at Jake with those golden eyes that had become so familiar. "We build something new, something better than what they tried to make us." Over the following weeks, Ghost integrated into their mountain sanctuary, his natural wolf instincts enhanced by the modifications making him an incredible guardian for their remote property. Sarah chose to stay as well, using her scientific knowledge to help Dr. Vasquez understand and care for the enhanced animals. But more importantly, she began working on a project that could change everything, a way to safely remove the modifications from any enhanced animal that wanted to return to a normal life, while preserving the connections and abilities of those who chose to keep them. Tommy continued to grow in confidence and ability, his gift expanding to include not just communication with enhanced animals, but a deeper understanding of the connection between all living things. He started a journal, documenting the stories of each rescued animal and the humans who loved them. Jake found himself becoming something he'd never expected, the leader of a growing community of people and enhanced animals who had chosen to build a new kind of family together. It wasn't the quiet life he'd planned when he'd moved to Cedar Falls with Tommy, but it was a life filled with purpose and wonder. One evening, as Jake sat on the porch watching Tommy play with Storm and Ghost in the fading light, Dr. Vasquez joined him with 2 cups of coffee. "Any regrets?" she asked. Jake thought about their old life, the silence, the worry, the constant fear that Tommy might never speak again. Then he looked at his son, laughing as he played with 2 of the most extraordinary animals on Earth, his voice clear and strong as he told them stories about the adventures they would have tomorrow. "None," Jake said firmly, "not a single one." "Nor I," came Storm's voice in his mind, warm with contentment. "We have found what we were truly meant to be." And as the stars came out over their mountain sanctuary, Jake realized that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come in the most unexpected packages, like a dying dog in a plastic bag, found by a silent boy who needed to learn that love could speak in ways that transcended words. But the most incredible part of their story was yet to come, because Tommy had started having dreams of other enhanced animals in facilities around the world, all waiting for someone to hear their call for help. Share your thoughts on Tommy's incredible journey from silence to becoming a bridge between 2 worlds. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to hear more amazing stories like this one.